A day ahead of the crucial EU summit, Angela Merkel has once again rejected the idea of Eurobonds. The German Chancellor has said that Germany will not share the liability of the entire Eurozone as long as she lives. Merkel has long been opposed to pooling the Eurozone's debt without proper financial reforms in debt-stricken countries. And her choice of words right before the summit seems to indicate that she will not compromise on the issue despite the threat to the single currency.
Am 14. Juni gesagt habe.
Apart from the fact that Euro bonds and Euro bills and so on are unconstitutional in Germany, I believe they are economically wrong and counterproductive.
Now, while the European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso supports the idea of Euro bonds, he does agree with the German Chancellor on the need for a banking and fiscal union to pull Europe out of the crisis.
A vicious circle has become established, whereby the use of taxpayers' funds to rescue banks makes sovereigns weaker, while the increasingly risk-averse banks stop lending to businesses that need funds, making the economy, and the banking sector with it, slow down, which again further weakens the sovereign. We can break this negative cycle now if we are bold enough to establish a strong and integrated financial framework. For a genuine economic and monetary union to be established, I think we need a banking union, a fiscal union, and further steps towards a political union.
All right, we've got Nick Parsons, who's head of market strategy at National Australia Bank, joining us on the show from London to give us a better sense of what to expect, not just from the EU summit, but also on the road ahead for the EU, the European Union. Now, Nick, to begin with, Mariano Rajoy has written an open letter to all EU leaders saying that if Europe must survive the crisis, it needs a fiscal and banking union. Leaders have been talking about it for weeks now, but we've seen little progress. What do you believe it will take to get them moving? Another crisis?
Well, the history of the EU is that we need two things, either a crisis or an immense amount of cheap money. The immense amount of cheap money led to 10 years of apparent prosperity from 1999 onwards. It seems very unlikely that that's in prospect right now. And such progress as has been made since the GFC has been crisis-driven. And you could argue that as long as we don't have crisis, we're just going to get this stalemate. Unfortunately, the time that's bought between stalemates gets shorter and shorter and is unlikely of itself to be resolved. So I think Mr. Ahoy is making a very good point that we need a banking and financial union. I'm not so sure, however, that his allies in Italy and France are prepared to give up enough sovereignty that would make that palatable to Germany.
Now, Nick, talking about a crisis, the spotlight is off Greece for the moment, but do you believe the country is going to come back into focus very soon?
I think it'll come back into focus, but perhaps not until the end of the summer. Let's bear in mind that the Prime Minister himself is incapacitated. We don't have a finance minister. And above all, there was no one in the election campaign who actually said, do you know what, these are my ideas for resolving the problem, this is what we should do, and please vote for me. All that we've heard through the campaign is complaints about what is apparently not working, about what shouldn't be done, and about what sort of extensions to timeframes may be necessary. So the Greek elections themselves don't really change anything, because no one had a plan beforehand and no one's got a plan now. To the extent that we can't have negotiations because there isn't a government and there aren't the officials to negotiate with, we might well find that Greece goes quiet for the next few weeks, and if all goes well, it mightn't be until September that it comes back as a burning issue.
Now, Nick, Angela Merkel has been dodging the Eurobond subject for many months now. Now she said that Europe would not share total debt liability for as long as I live. Just quoting her. Do you think her obstinacy on the Eurobond subject could be a deal breaker at the EU summit?
It's nice to have someone pointing out the plain financial realities. Whether or not it's going to be helpful this weekend, when it is likely to be a bit of a deal breaker, again we shall find out in the fullness of time. The analogy that I would use here is that between allowing someone to use your credit card and allowing them to use a prepaid card for spending. And I think what Ms Merkel is seeking actively to avoid is giving Germany's credit rating to someone else to do what they will with. I think she would be more happy to have some limited guarantees and some limited support, perhaps over and above debt above the Maastricht ceiling might well be consolidated and might well be run down in a coordinated and joint fashion. So I think she is prepared, and we will see some flexibility in the fullness of time. We're going to need that flexibility anyhow if she's going to go into coalition with the SPD next year. But for this weekend it might just be a step too far in concrete terms, but I wouldn't expect the German rhetoric to be quite as harsh as many might be expecting. There is some room for negotiation here. There is some room for joint underwriting, but it's not going to be with Germany's credit rating and with Germany's credit card, but they might be able to offer a debit card for others up to certain prepaid limits.